Hello everyone, it's Theme Park Avenue, I'm Eric, and recently I went to Six Flags Great Escape, or The Great Escape, and I must say, this will not be the most positive review. So, I'm going to talk about my poor experience here, as I think this is probably the worst Six Flags park, and I'll give advice so you can have a better time here than I did. Before we begin this review, I encourage you to subscribe to Theme Park Avenue so you know when new coaster content comes out. I have other reviews, rankings, and other content on the way. Now, I will point out, this might get pretty negative at points because I did not have a good time here, but I'll try to be fair. I'll go through my whole experience, analyze the best and worst things about the park, and give you some advice so you can have a good time here. Let's begin with the entrance experience. So we arrived on a Friday in June, and there was a large group of kids on a field trip. So we thought we were smart going during school time, but clearly we were not. I'll tell you that right now. Try to plan so you do not go on a day with field trips, because that can definitely be a pretty major dampener in your experience. So walking up, I do like the way they present the entrance. You have Steamin Demon and Adirondack Outlaw right at the front, and a sign reading Great Escape that's on the side of the Desperado warehouse building, sort of, where they house part of the log flume. So that's good. Walking in, we get through security about 15, maybe 10 minutes before the park opening, and then we get through the entrance about 2 minutes before. Now, the big thing from the start was that they did not handle the entrance very well. It took the people in front of us a good 3 minutes to get into the park, and they already had tickets, so I was very surprised at that, and that was somewhat frustrating. So other members of my party in a different line were like, what took so long? So that was already an interesting start, but for the rides themselves, we walk over to Adirondack Outlaw first, thinking that's going to be a line that does not die down. And I will say, that is probably where you want to go first. I will say, we did wait a good 15 minutes after opening to get on the ride because they didn't run. They had a few tests going, but they never opened the ride, even though we were near the very front of the line. So Adirondack Outlaw, we went there, and the ride itself is fantastic. The first cycle, it's quite thrilling. I'd never been on anything like it actually when I went, so that was interesting. And I like this kind of flat ride. I'd love to see more of them at other Six Flags parks even. It's intense, fun, very good. And you stay at the top for a very long time, I should let you know of that. You're sitting right set up, but you have to wait for the other car to load. And that is where you get beautiful views of the surrounding area, mountains, great overlooks of the park. There's some rivers, it's very nice. And I'm going to point out one other thing. If you are a similar size to someone in your party, you will probably not be able to sit next to them due to some weight distribution things. Just kind of a side note. That said, this ride is great, and it is definitely one of the best rides at this park, and a very strong flat ride. So after this, we had the Steamin Demon. I will point out, from the top of Adirondack Outlaw, we noticed that pretty much nothing was open. Steamin Demon was open, we rode that, and Coaster Studios had to call this a steaming pile of trash, and I somewhat agree, but it wasn't quite as bad as he said. I thought the first drop and the loop were okay. They didn't have great forces, but they were not rough. The final corkscrews were quite bad, but before that, it is a passable roller coaster, so it is a bit worse than Corkscrew at Cedar Point, but it is not the worst thing out there. And I'm not even sure if it's the worst roller coaster at Great Escape. I'll get to that later. Next, we go in the line for Canyon Blaster, the Aero Mine Train, sort of. And this, we saw, was a pretty long line. And when I saw just how slow the ride was moving, I was like, you know what, we'll come back to this later. So we head toward Alpine Bobsled and Comet. Alpine Bobsled was closed, and we found ourselves going to a dead end. And here's something I have to touch on. The layout in this park definitely was not prepared for the Six Flags kind of thing. It was just not easy to find my way around. At one point, I thought I was headed toward Comet, and I found myself in a dead end with just a bunch of lunch pavilions. So we ended up going backtracking, pretty long time, and we get over to Comet because Alpine Bobsled is gone and closed and probably never going to open again, but maybe it will. And Comet is fantastic. So our experience, my brother and I, we were in a car together. We start going, get to the lift hill, and we stop. So the ride broke down, not quite sure what it was, but they sent us through after that, and then we get off, then they send a few cars with no people, then they send people through again, so I did get 2 rides on Comet at this point, and then after that the ride was down for the whole day. Very confusing, but I'll get to that later. And one thing I should point out, in summer in this area, there are tons of spongy moth caterpillars. We saw some of them all over the supports of Comet, all over the houses, all over the bathrooms, they're everywhere. So this is a common thing in the summer here. And these things are poisonous. Not terribly so. They can irritate your skin a bit, but I do want to warn, you will want to be ready to be very close to some of them, and they will legitimately fall out of the sky off of roller coaster cars and other things and end up on you. So if you are deathly afraid of that sort of thing, I would honestly recommend not going to this area at all, especially not in summer. But these things are essentially like cicada broods. When you see those every few years, only these happen every year from my understanding. So to talk about Comet. Comet is fantastic. You have great airtime. The first drop is pretty strong. It has a bit of a rattle to it, but it's more of a classic wooden rattle than the painful one, so I actually enjoyed that rattle and thought I added to the coaster. It is a long ride, it is well paced, pretty well taken care of. It's probably among my favorite wooden coasters, so that's not very a high bar of praise because I've only been on El Toro and Ghost Rider and then Beast and pretty much nothing else that's great. This is possibly a top 5 wooden coaster for me. It's quite comparable to Apocalypse the ride at Six Flags Magic Mountain, though I did like this a little better. So that is a very good ride, and many call that the best roller coaster in the park. I would agree. However, I do actually think Adirondack Outlaw is better, though maybe that's just because I really enjoy that view a lot from the top. So after this, we have no idea what to do. This is where things get very, very tough because of lines. So this is something I gotta touch on. This park has easily the worst operations in the chain, no doubt. You might think La Ronde, I'll get to that in my La Ronde review, but this is way worse. So at this point, Flashback has probably hour-long line, maybe longer than that. That's the boomerang, by the way. And then there are other things like Greezed Lightning, the Super Loop, and there's very few things that have short lines. One thing we ended up doing, our family went on the train ride. I don't even remember the exact name. I think it was the Storytown train ride. That line was pretty short. I'd say we waited through 1 cycle, so it was a bit under 10 minutes. And this one is fascinating. So you go past some story structures, they're based on fairy tales and such. You go past this jungle area, and you go past this old walking trail that used to be accessible through Timbertown, the kids area. And I guess Timbertown was a fitting name for this trail because some trees have literally fallen onto it. So that's never opening again, I'm pretty sure. And unfortunately, there's this one elephant statue that you can see on the train ride where an ear's kind of falling off and part of the torso is like chunked out. So there are definitely a few things that could be done to make this look a little nicer, but that was not a huge deal. So this ride was fine, and they do have a very nice looking area in this park. I should probably talk about now the scenery. This park's atmosphere is quite nice. It's in a beautiful setting. I love the surrounding mountains, and the forests that you're in do kind of make it feel quite immersive. You have a lot of small, somewhat charming little storybook houses, some old west area houses. There's this one kind of small creek over by the train ride with a sky ride going above it and some boats going in it, and some of the more major rides to the right, and then to the left you have Timbertown and such. The park looks nice, so walking around you can enjoy a bit. But I will point out, despite being a heavily wooded park, the park does lack shade. So I did want to touch on that appearance a little bit because that's one of the strongest things about the park. So we get in line for Flashback after a ride on Pandemonium, which is similar to the Cyborg ride at Six Flags New England. Fun flat ride, but not one I'm going to get into much. So Flashback, I kid you not, we waited 45 minutes and a total of 4 trains had cycled through. I am not joking. That is the worst operations I've seen on any ride. And I will point out, line jumping is a pretty big thing. This might just be because we went on a day of field trips, but unfortunately, there was a lot, and I mean a lot of line jumping. Usually, I'll see it on most rides I go on in a Six Flags park, heck, pretty much any park. There will be 5 people or so at worst, there was legitimately probably 30 people who went in front at different times. Many of them were from school groups, some were not, and I think it was just kind of infuriating at certain points because the line was so long for that particular ride. So we did give up on Flashback because it probably would have been another hour or two before we were able to get on. And we go over to Sasquatch. Sasquatch is the S&S drop tower. They were running one tower, and here's a little minor nitpick. The Six Flags TV. Many of those in other parks have Looney Tunes clips and some top 10 things from Warner Bros. Stuff, and trivia, and plenty of fun stuff to keep you entertained. This one played the same loop that was a mashup of 5 songs, just a few seconds from each one, over and over again. And it was pretty loud, so you could definitely enjoy that very, very loud music for a very long time. That said, Sasquatch moved relatively fast, and it is a solid drop tower, even though it's among the weaker ones I've been on probably, but it is good. So after that, we head back toward Canyon Blaster. I should point out that broke down at least twice before we got on. We did get on it, and this is in serious contention for the worst roller coaster at the park. It's quite rough at points, but more importantly, it is just the most boring family coaster of all time. I know it's for families, so I should not be too harsh, but Aero Mine Trains are usually such fun rides. This one legitimately feels like you will valley at a certain point, because so little happens. And the roughness does not help, so it is among the weakest rides in the park. And I know Coaster Studios already touched on the paint job thing. They have some beautiful paints, really well colored and stuff, on one part of the ride, but only that which can be easily seen from the main pathway. The rest of it is pretty old and faded, and I just don't kind of like that they did that. Then we rode Condor. That was our final ride. Cool to get on that. It was a fun little one. And the one other thing I'll touch on is the kiddie coaster. At a certain point of the day, we had gotten on so little, and so much time had passed that I thought, you know what? I saw Canobie Coaster said that this kiddie coaster can be ridden without a child, and even though I did actually have a younger brother who did meet the requirements, we all went over thinking, we can at least get on this one ride that doesn't have a line. They ended up only letting him ride by himself. He's basically barely short enough to be in the requirement range, so I was a little confused by the rule, but he rode on his own and had fun. And we ended up getting on some stuff, but while some would go to a park to get on as many credits as possible and stuff, I left with a total of 3, so that was not a huge number. But you know what? It's not a huge deal as I don't focus on credits that much at a park. And you know what? That ended up being the whole day. Condor is a fun ride, and I'm going to go into some detail with the overall park. So first off, do keep in mind that the operations here just are not well done. I think most of the employees, this was among their first days doing the whole thing, so maybe I just chose a bad time to go. You definitely want to try to go midweek in summer if you're able to. That's only a July thing, I'm pretty sure. But just try to avoid days of large crowds, and you will be able to have a fun time. That said, I did not have a great experience here because the lines were really poorly managed, so I only got on a few rides. And I could mention that this is the weakest ride lineup of any Six Flags park, but it's not a bad lineup. I like Comet, and I like Adirondack Outlaw, and some of the other flat rides are good, and there's some nice charming walking trails. The Alice in Wonderland one is pretty good, even though it is pretty simple. There is a nice storybook sort of family park charm to this one, and I can see why some like this. And I will point out, Canobie Coaster said this is a very nice park and charming, and he absolutely recommends it. Mike, you are a great reviewer, but I gotta say, either you got really lucky, I got really unlucky, or you were sugarcoating. Because I just felt that the operations held this park back more than any other. They seriously, compared to Six Flags Over Georgia, I would say Over Georgia's operations are fantastic. And that is quite a low bar, because I thought Over Georgia's operations were the worst I'd seen in any major theme park before that. But unfortunately, Great Escape, while it does have some great rides and a nice atmosphere, issues such as the poor management of rides and the long lines that happen even on semi-crowded days, because it was not the most crowded day. It was not a great park, and I think it's my least favorite Six Flags park and possibly my least favorite major theme park in America. So if you go to this park, remember, try to hit up the rides that are near the front of the park that are easy to get to first. Comet is not a priority to get on because it runs so fast. Like, its line never got more than 10 minutes. So keep that in mind. And if you have any more questions about planning a trip to the Great Escape this summer, about whether it be crowds or caterpillars or something else, let me know in the comments below. Subscribe to the channel for more content. I hope this did not come off as too negative, but I did not have a great time here. I'll see you next time.